Riley Carter had always been different. At 14, she wasn't the girl who spent weekends at the mall or glued to her phone. While her peers were absorbed in video games and social media, Riley's mind was consumed by the mechanics of flight. She could recite every aircraft's specifications, the aerodynamic differences between jets, and the control systems of the most advanced fighters ever built. Flight simulators weren't just a hobby. They were her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the small-town routines of rural Florida and imagine herself in the cockpit of planes that could fly faster than the speed of sound. Her bedroom was a shrine to aviation. Walls were plastered with posters of F-22 Raptors, experimental jets, and historic fighter planes. Every shelf held models meticulously built and painted with perfect precision. Her laptop screens displayed flight diagrams, engine blueprints, and cockpit schematics. She had memorized every switch, button, and emergency procedure for several aircraft models, mostly for fun, mostly to see if she could. But the dream had always felt distant, abstract, untouchable. Pilots were adults, trained through years of rigorous programs. She was a kid. Until today. An envelope arrived at her front door that morning, bearing the official seal of the United States Air Force. Her hands trembled as she tore it open, revealing a neatly typed invitation. Special Observation Program, Tyndall Air Force Base. Selected candidate, Riley Carter. She blinked several times, convinced her eyes were deceiving her. Her parents were equally stunned, her father almost dropping his morning coffee. "Riley, this isn't a prank," he asked, voice shaky. Riley shook her head, heart hammering so fast it felt like it might escape her chest. A mixture of exhilaration and nerves coursed through her veins. She had spent years dreaming of this moment. Now it was real. Hours later, she arrived at the base, her backpack clutched tightly, filled with her flight notebooks and sketches. The sheer scale of Tyndall Air Force Base left her in awe. Jets lined the tarmac like steel birds frozen in anticipation, their sleek forms reflecting the early morning sun. Pilots in crisp flight suits moved with a calm precision that Riley could hardly comprehend. They laughed, adjusted helmets, checked gauges, and occasionally glanced skyward, as if they were connected to the heavens themselves. And somewhere in that vast array of technology and human skill sat the F-22 Raptor she had only seen in magazines, the aircraft known as Falcon 1. Riley's tour guide, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Shaw, noticed her wide-eyed gaze. He smiled, amused. "You must be Riley. Heard a lot about you. Don't worry, we'll take care of you." He led her through the hangar past engines, tools, and maintenance crews. Every sound was amplified in her mind, the whirring of machines, the echo of boots on concrete, the distant roar of jets taking off. It was intoxicating. She scribbled notes furiously, unable to resist the compulsion to record every detail. Then came the moment she would never forget. The F-22's engines roared to life as a test run began. The vibration of the jet reverberated through her chest, and the smell of burning fuel made her eyes water. A pilot climbed into the cockpit, straps snapping, helmet sealing. Riley's stomach flipped as the plane taxied to the runway. She had studied every diagram, every technical manual, every schematic of an F-22, but nothing had prepared her for the visceral reality of standing mere feet from one. Suddenly, a shrill alarm cut through the morning air, sharp and urgent. The pilot froze for a fraction of a second, a beat too long. Riley's heart leapt. Something was wrong. The jet lurched unexpectedly on the runway. She noticed the instruments flicker, screens that should have been steady jumped erratically, warning lights blinking in chaotic patterns. Ground crew members shouted over radios, their voices tense, urgent. Lieutenant Commander Shaw's brow furrowed as he pulled his headset tighter. "What's happening?" "Falcon 1, report." There was a crackling reply, static-laden and strained, and then silence. Riley's stomach dropped. In the brief lull, she saw the pilot's hands tighten over the controls, his jaw clenching. The jet's nose dipped suddenly, then corrected, then dipped again, as if it were alive and struggling to regain control. "Riley, come here," Shaw shouted, grabbing her arm. He pulled her closer to the side of the jet, shielding her from the roar and vibration. Step back, it's not safe. But Riley couldn't move. Her eyes were glued to the cockpit. Something in her chest told her that, even as a kid, she understood what was happening. The aircraft was failing, systems going haywire, and if no one acted, Falcon 1 could crash. The pilot emerged from the cockpit, face pale and sweaty, muttering into his headset. "Stabilizers, engines, I can't." His words cut off as the jet shuddered violently, alarm bells shrieking louder. Smoke curled from the side vent. The hangar crew scrambled, some diving behind equipment, others reaching for emergency procedures. The base's control tower lit up with red warnings, radar screens tracking the rapidly deteriorating situation. Riley's heart pounded, her mind racing through everything she had memorized in simulations, everything she had read in manuals. She didn't know how, but she knew instinctively that the pilot needed help. Her fingers itched as though they were being pulled toward the console. And then, impossibly, the pilot turned toward her, eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. You know the systems, right?" he said, his voice barely audible over the alarms. Riley blinked, her mouth went dry. I think I can help," she whispered. Time seemed to freeze. Around them, chaos erupted, the roar of engines, the screech of tires on concrete, the panicked voices over radios. Every second stretched, taut with tension. The entire base seemed to hold its breath. The impossible was about to happen. A 14-year-old girl, clutching notebooks and dreams, might be the only hope to save Falcon 1 from catastrophic failure. And in that moment, with the jet shuddering and alarms screaming, Riley realized something chilling. If she failed, there would be no second chance. Suspenseful ending. Could a kid really survive and save an F-22 in mid-crisis, when even seasoned pilots were on the brink of disaster? Riley's legs trembled as she followed Lieutenant Commander Shaw toward the cockpit of Falcon 1. The jet's hull vibrated under the roar of engines, alarms blaring relentlessly. Ground crew scrambled around, shouting instructions, their voices lost in the deafening chaos. Riley could barely think. Her mind raced, piecing together every detail she had memorized over years of flight simulations. She could see the pilot's hands shaking on the controls, eyes wide in sheer panic. The F-22's nose dipped dangerously, wobbling as though it had a mind of its own. Smoke curled faintly from a vent near the engine compartment. "Riley, are you sure about this?" Shaw asked, glancing at her with disbelief, his voice barely audible over the shriek of the alarms. Riley swallowed, her throat dry. I've studied every system, emergency overrides, hydraulics, stabilizers. I think I can help." Shaw's eyes widened. "You're a kid." "I know," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But I know this jet. I know what it needs." The pilot nodded slowly, as if recognizing that their last hope was not in the hands of another trained adult, but in a girl who had spent years immersed in schematics, simulations, and theory. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the controls. "Okay, if you can help, don't mess it up. This plane doesn't forgive mistakes." Riley climbed into the cockpit, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The controls were a familiar maze, almost comforting in their complexity. She took a deep breath, suppressing the surge of adrenaline threatening to overwhelm her. Sweat trickled down her forehead as she placed her hands on the throttle and the flight stick, her fingers brushing buttons she had only ever seen in diagrams. The jet lurched violently as if protesting her presence. Every alarm screeched in unison, a symphony of chaos. Riley's eyes darted across the instrument panel, scanning for critical failures. Engine output, hydraulic pressure, fuel flow, stabilizer alignment. She could feel the jet straining under the stress, metal groaning as it fought to stay airborne. Outside, the base erupted into organized chaos. Ground crews scrambled to clear the runway for emergency procedures. Jets scrambled into the sky in response, and the control tower's radars lit up with warnings. Everyone watching knew one thing: Falcon 1 was seconds away from catastrophe. Riley's mind snapped into focus. Years of simulation drills, coding exercises, and late-night reading sessions suddenly became real-time knowledge. She recalled a scenario she had practiced dozens of times: engine failure at high altitude. Every calculation, every correction had been burned into her memory. She adjusted the stabilizers minutely, recalculated engine thrust, and whispered commands under her breath as if the jet could hear her. "Engine 1 pressure dropping, adjust fuel mix," she muttered. Hands moving with precision, she tapped and twisted switches. Alarms flared, then dimmed slightly. The jet shuddered, but the sudden dip in performance stabilized. The instructor pilot's eyes widened. How are you doing that?" "I know the systems," Riley replied calmly, though her hands were slick with sweat. "Just trust me." The jet pitched suddenly, throwing Riley and the instructor sideways. Alarms screamed anew, smoke streaking across the cockpit glass. Riley's stomach lurched. Every instinct screamed to freeze, but her mind moved faster than her body could keep up. She had to act. Every second she hesitated could be the difference between survival and a catastrophic crash. Riley adjusted the flight stick with surgical precision, compensating for the jet's unpredictable movements. The F-22 groaned under her guidance, the engines fighting to maintain thrust. Outside the cockpit, the world seemed to blur, a kaleidoscope of sun, clouds, and tarmac rushing past in dizzying motion. Ground crews ducked, alarms blared, and overhead, radar screens tracked the jet's every move, showing a spiraling, erratic path. Then came the hardest part: altitude loss. The jet was dropping faster than expected, the trajectory pointing toward disaster. Riley's fingers flew over the control panel, toggling systems she had only ever read about, monitoring fuel, engine pressure, and stabilizers. She adjusted the throttle incrementally, calculated the descent angle, and whispered, "Steady, steady, steady." The instructor pilot gritted his teeth, gripping the remaining controls tightly. "I don't believe this," he muttered. "She's controlling it." Riley's mind went into overdrive. She remembered the simulated emergency protocols she had practiced endlessly: engine failure, hydraulic pressure loss, flight stabilization, emergency landing sequences. Each action had to be perfect. A single miscalculation could send them tumbling out of the sky. Her knuckles whitened as she manipulated the controls, correcting the jet's yaw, pitch, and roll with uncanny precision. The jet groaned and creaked, the vibrations shaking the cockpit violently. Smoke spiraled faintly from the instrument panels. Alarms shrieked in continuous warning. Riley's focus narrowed. Every other sound, the shouting, the rumble of engines, the crackle of radios, faded into the background. All that existed was her and Falcon 1. Outside, radar screens lit up with bright red warnings, flashing, alarming, desperate. Ground crews stared in disbelief as the jet's path stabilized just enough to prevent it from spiraling out of control. Commanders in the tower exchanged stunned glances. They had never seen a plane respond so precisely under these conditions, especially not to the hands of a teenager. Minutes felt like hours. Riley's heart pounded, yet her mind was razor-sharp. The jet's nose corrected slightly, engines responded more steadily, and the descent slowed. She glanced at the instructor pilot. His face was pale, a mixture of terror, admiration, and awe. She's actually doing it," he muttered under his breath. But Falcon 1 was far from safe. The instruments flashed warnings constantly, systems teetering on the edge of failure. The jet had stabilized for the moment, but every second was a high-wire act. Riley had bought them time, but could she keep it up long enough for a safe landing? A sudden alarm blared louder than before, a hydraulic failure warning. The jet shuddered violently, throwing Riley against her harness. Smoke curled more aggressively now, and the cockpit filled with a faint burning odor. She realized they couldn't keep the jet airborne much longer without immediate action. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it down, letting logic and training guide her. Riley reached for the emergency override, hands moving with instinctive precision. She whispered to herself, "Steady, just like the simulations," the jet responded, shuddering once, twice, then gradually leveling out. Outside, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ground crews froze, eyes glued to the airborne nightmare that was somehow, impossibly, still under control. The instructor pilot swallowed hard, eyes wide. "You're a miracle," he whispered. Riley didn't answer. She could feel the jet fighting her, every mechanical component screaming under stress. Her mind raced with calculations: descent trajectory, wind velocity, engine thrust, control surfaces, all balancing on an almost impossible tightrope. She had done this 100 times in simulations, but never with real lives, never with the lives of her and her instructor, and the potential destruction that could happen if she failed. And then, just as she began to breathe slightly easier, the jet's nose dipped again. The altitude warning blared violently. The ground rushed closer than it should have. Riley's stomach lurched. She realized with a jolt that stabilization was only temporary. They had seconds before they crashed. Her hands moved faster than thought. Fingers flying over the switches, toggling systems, adjusting stabilizers, manipulating thrust. Sweat dripped into her eyes. The alarm screamed in protest. The jet's body shuddered violently, threatening to spin out of control. And in that split second, Riley knew something terrifying. She was the only thing keeping Falcon 1 from becoming a fiery disaster on the tarmac of Tyndall Air Force Base. Suspenseful ending. Could a 14-year-old girl truly stabilize the most advanced fighter jet in the world long enough to survive and land it? Or would the next moment be their last? The cockpit was a whirlwind of flashing lights, shrieking alarms, and heat that seemed to press down on Riley from all sides. Smoke lingered faintly in the corners, curling like a living thing as the jet trembled violently under her fingertips. Every instinct in her body screamed panic, but years of simulations kicked in with uncanny clarity. She had trained for this, not just in theory, but in 1,000 nights of coding, calculating, and imagining herself in exactly this scenario. "Throttle," the instructor pilot shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the roar of Falcon 1's engines. His hands hovered helplessly above the controls, gripping the ejection lever as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to sanity. Riley's pulse hammered, but her fingers moved with mechanical precision. She adjusted the throttle in micro-movements, each click and turn responding perfectly to the chaotic rhythm of the failing aircraft. The jet bucked violently, nose dipping dangerously toward the horizon, then rising again. Alarms flashed in angry red streaks across the instrument panels. Hydraulic warnings, engine warnings, and stabilizer alerts all screamed simultaneously. Riley's heart pounded in time with the beeps. She leaned forward, eyes scanning the panels, memorized numbers flickering like a high-speed game of code she had played 100 times. "Stabilizers now," she whispered under her breath, almost to herself, fingers flying across switches she had only ever pressed in simulators. The jet shuddered, teetering between chaos and controlled motion. The instructor pilot's jaw went slack as he watched in disbelief. How are you doing that?" he muttered, voice barely audible. "I know the systems," Riley said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Just trust me." Outside the cockpit, the world blurred into a spinning panorama of clouds, sunlight, and the distant runway that seemed impossibly small. The radar tower flickered warnings. Falcon 1 was unstable, a potential loss of the jet imminent. Ground crews ducked behind barriers, shouting into radios, their voices cracking with panic. Jets scrambled in the sky, responding to the emergency, but none dared to approach too closely. Riley's mind worked at impossible speed. She remembered the specific sequence for engine override during an emergency mid-air malfunction. Every step had to be exact. Milliseconds could make the difference between saving the aircraft and turning it into a missile of destruction. She toggled the engine compensators, recalculated thrust ratios, and rerouted hydraulics on instinct. Each adjustment made the jet respond slightly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough to keep Falcon 1 from spiraling out of control. The instructor pilot's eyes widened, disbelief etched on his face. She's actually controlling it, he said. His voice quivered. A kid is keeping us alive. Riley ignored the compliment, focused entirely on the flight. The jet pitched again, violently this time, throwing her against her harness. Sweat stung her eyes. She blinked it away, whispering calculations as she moved hands and feet in perfect synchrony, coaxing the failing systems into temporary obedience. The metal groaned beneath her touch. Every vibration, every shudder reminded her that Falcon 1 was teetering on the edge of disaster. "Altitude dropping, we're losing it," the instructor shouted. His words cut through the haze of alarms and smoke, a reminder of the stakes. Riley's stomach flipped as she assessed their position. They were still high enough to attempt recovery, but the window was closing. She remembered a trick from one of her simulation programs. Micro-adjustments in the ailerons, combined with slight thrust shifts, could stabilize a jet with failing hydraulics. It was risky. In real life, a single miscalculation could send the plane spinning into an unrecoverable dive. But Riley had no choice. She implemented it. The jet shuddered violently, alarms screaming in protest. Riley felt her fingers burn from the effort, sweat dripping onto the instrument panel. The stabilizers responded just enough. The nose leveled marginally. It wasn't perfect, but it bought them crucial seconds. Outside, the control tower erupted into activity. Commands were being shouted. Radar screens tracked the jet's every movement, and emergency procedures were activated. Air Force pilots in nearby jets watched in stunned silence as Falcon 1, the most advanced fighter in their arsenal, responded to the hands of a 14-year-old girl. The instructor pilot's hands hovered, unsure whether to help or simply watch in awe. "I can't believe this. She's keeping us alive." Riley gritted her teeth, focusing. Her mind ran through every emergency protocol she had memorized. Emergency landing sequences, engine failures, hydraulic reroutes, and throttle adjustments. Her fingers moved almost mechanically, responding faster than thought, faster than fear. She realized in a terrifying, exhilarating moment that she was entirely alone in this cockpit, responsible not just for herself, but for the survival of the jet and her instructor. The jet pitched again, violently. Riley's stomach lurched as alarms screamed in unison. Smoke curled from the engine vents, black and threatening. She instinctively leaned forward, adjusting every lever, every stabilizer, and every control input. Falcon 1 groaned, shuddered, but responded. It was imperfect, but it was alive. "Steady, steady, steady," she whispered to herself, voice barely audible over the roar. The jet responded fractionally. Each second was a battle, each movement a calculation. The instructor pilot watched, pale, breathless, as the impossible unfolded before him. A child guiding one of the deadliest fighter jets in the world through a near-catastrophic failure. Then came a sudden jolt. One of the engines sputtered, alarms blaring anew. The cockpit filled with the smell of burning circuitry. Riley's heart raced. She had anticipated many failures, but the engine dying mid-flight added a layer of terror she hadn't simulated. Every calculation, every emergency protocol was now under intense pressure. One wrong move could send them hurtling into disaster. Her fingers flew across the controls, rerouting fuel, balancing thrust, adjusting stabilizers. The jet trembled violently, threatening to spin out of control, but gradually, imperceptibly, it began to respond. The nose leveled, the descent slowed, and the pitch stabilized. Riley's eyes burned with focus, her breath ragged. They were not safe, but they were not falling. Outside, the world seemed to pause. Radar screens, ground crews, and pilots alike watched in disbelief as Falcon 1, teetering on the edge of disaster, remained airborne. Commanders whispered to each other in stunned tones. No one had ever witnessed anything like this. A 14-year-old girl, completely civilian, controlling the Air Force's most advanced fighter jet and keeping it alive. Riley swallowed, heart hammering, sweat dripping from her brow. She glanced at the instructor pilot. His eyes were wide, a mixture of terror and awe. He muttered almost to himself, She's actually doing it." The jet pitched again, violently, throwing them both against their harnesses. Riley's stomach lurched, but she adjusted, calculating the trajectory, stabilizing the descent. Outside, the runway lights were a distant blur, closer than they should have been. Time compressed. Every second was a life-or-death struggle. And then, a realization hit her with icy clarity. Stabilization alone would not be enough. They had bought seconds, maybe a minute at most. They needed to find a way to land, or none of it would matter. The jet was still alive, but Falcon 1 had become a beast teetering on the edge of control. Suspenseful ending. Riley knew it now. The next few moments would determine everything. Could a 14-year-old girl actually bring Falcon 1 safely back to the ground, or would the sky itself claim them both? The cockpit felt like a furnace, heat radiating off Falcon 1's stressed metal frame. Alarms blared like a chorus of panic, smoke curled in choking spirals, and the jet's nose dipped unpredictably as Riley's heart pounded in tandem with the machinery. Every fiber of her being was focused on the screens, gauges, and levers before her. She had done this in simulations countless times, but nothing could replicate the raw terror of real failure, of the lives at stake, not just her own, not just the pilot beside her. Lieutenant Commander Shaw kept muttering under his breath, a mixture of awe and fear. "She's controlling it. I can't believe this." His knuckles were white as he gripped the edges of the cockpit. Riley barely registered his presence. Her focus was absolute. Falcon 1 shuddered beneath her touch, screaming as if alive, protesting the micro-adjustments she demanded to stabilize its failing systems. "Throttle, balance the engines," Riley shouted, voice hoarse, as she manipulated the jet's complex controls. She calculated the failing engine's output against fuel reserves, hydraulic pressure, and stabilizer alignment, all while considering altitude, wind velocity, and runway approach trajectory. Each micro-movement she made had consequences. Every fraction of a second counted. A single miscalculation could send them tumbling to the ground, turning Falcon 1 into a fiery tomb. The jet pitched violently, throwing Riley against her harness, and the instructor pilot gritted his teeth. "This is insane, a child. A child is saving us." Riley barely registered the words. Her mind was a blur of calculations, sequences, and procedures. She remembered a specific emergency override she had memorized. If the hydraulics failed further, micro-adjustments to the ailerons combined with precise thrust modulation could buy enough control to attempt a landing. It was risky, almost suicidal in real-life conditions, but she had no choice. The jet was teetering on the edge of disaster, and she was the only one who could pull it back. Hands and feet moved in a synchronized dance over the controls. She toggled switches, pressed buttons, and adjusted levers with lightning speed. The jet responded fractionally, then more steadily. Each correction was a battle won against chaos, each second a small victory against death. Sweat dripped into her eyes, her muscles ached, but she ignored it all. The only thing that mattered was keeping Falcon 1 alive. Outside, radar screens in the control tower lit up with bright red warnings, blinking furiously. Ground crews shouted instructions into radios, ducking behind barriers, their voices filled with panic. Nearby jets watched in disbelief as Falcon 1, the Air Force's crown jewel, danced on the edge of destruction under the hands of a 14-year-old girl. The instructor pilot's eyes were wide with awe. "I've flown this plane for years. Nothing like this," he muttered. She's keeping us alive." Riley's stomach lurched as the jet pitched again, the nose dipping dangerously toward the horizon. She adjusted the stabilizers, recalculated the descent angle, and whispered instructions to herself as if the jet could hear her. The metal groaned under stress, every vibration a reminder that Falcon 1 was literally fighting to stay airborne. She glanced at the engine readouts. One engine was failing faster than anticipated, hydraulics were fluctuating, and the altitude was dropping too quickly. Seconds were slipping through her fingers like sand. She realized that stabilization alone would not suffice. She needed a controlled descent, and she needed it now. "Brace for maneuvers," she whispered under her breath, hands flying across the controls. "We're going to fight this, we're going to win this." Riley calculated wind speeds, angle of attack, engine thrust, and control surface response with a speed that stunned even herself. She initiated a series of micro-adjustments, carefully balancing the failing engine's output against the fully functioning one, redirecting hydraulics to the remaining control surfaces, and maintaining enough lift to prevent a catastrophic dive. Falcon 1 groaned, shuddered, but gradually, imperceptibly, began to obey her commands. The instructor pilot watched, trembling. I've never, this is impossible," he whispered. Riley's hands moved like lightning, adjusting, calculating, improvising. She could feel Falcon 1's responses in her fingertips, each shudder and vibration a language she instinctively understood. Sweat poured down her face, her chest heaving, muscles burning from the intense concentration. And yet, amid the chaos, there was clarity, a singular focus. Failure was not an option. Outside, the world blurred. Clouds streaked past the canopy like liquid silver, the runway below a distant line of hope and danger. Ground crews ducked behind barriers, shouting into radios, while radar operators shouted updates in rapid-fire succession. Every eye in the base was trained on Falcon 1, watching in awe as the impossible unfolded before them. A teenage girl stabilizing one of the most advanced fighter jets in the world under extreme conditions. Then another alarm flared, hydraulic pressure dropping in the left stabilizer. The jet shuddered violently, nose dipping sharply. Riley's heart skipped a beat. She had anticipated some failures, but the severity of this one was greater than she had practiced. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced it down. Logic, training, and instinct would have to be enough. She rerouted hydraulic pressure to compensating surfaces, adjusted the ailerons in microcorrections, and modulated engine thrust to maintain altitude. Falcon 1 groaned, shuddered violently, but responded. Slowly, imperfectly, yet it was alive. The instructor pilot's eyes filled with tears, disbelief etched across his face. She's doing it. She's actually controlling it." Riley didn't respond. Her focus was absolute. She was aware only of the jet, the instruments, and the fragile thread that kept them airborne. She realized with a chill that they were still far from safety. Falcon 1 was stabilized, but it was a temporary reprieve. A single misstep now could undo everything. The descent had to be managed carefully, perfectly, or they would plummet into disaster. The ground seemed impossibly far, yet tantalizingly close. Radar screens flashed warnings of dangerously low altitude, engines fluctuated unpredictably, and the jet groaned with every adjustment. Riley's mind raced through emergency landing sequences, calculating the precise angle, speed, and trajectory needed to attempt a recovery on the runway below. She whispered to herself, a mantra of calculation and determination. Steady, stable, controlled, we can do this. Falcon 1 responded to her touch with micro-adjustments, each one buying precious seconds, each one keeping them alive. The jet's shrieks of protest were deafening, alarms flashing relentlessly, smoke curling from vents, but the impossible was happening. They were holding together. And yet Riley knew the truth. Stabilization was just the beginning. Descent, approach, and landing, the most dangerous phase, was still ahead. One miscalculation now would doom them all. Suspenseful ending. Riley understood in her bones that the next few moments would define everything. Could she maintain control long enough to attempt a landing, or would Falcon 1 finally succumb to its fatal damage, spiraling them into destruction? Riley Carter gritted her teeth, her knuckles white on the controls as Falcon 1 trembled beneath her fingers. The jet had stabilized for the moment, but every second brought new dangers. Smoke still curled from the vents, warning lights blinked in angry red, and one engine groaned under stress. She could feel the aircraft straining, metal bending and twisting with every adjustment. Every muscle in her body was tense, every thought focused on one impossible goal, keeping the F-22 airborne long enough to attempt a landing. The instructor pilot beside her leaned close, his face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. I don't how. His voice cracked under the roar of alarms and engines. Riley didn't answer. Words could not capture the precision, the calculations, the nerve it took to wrest control of a machine designed for the most elite pilots in the world. Outside, the base was a frenzy. Radar screens flashed warnings in bright, alarming red. Ground crews ducked behind barriers, shouting into radios. Nearby jets scrambled to intercept, ready to guide or assist in any way possible. Every pilot, commander, and engineer on the base was glued to the unfolding disaster. They had never seen anything like this. A teenager was keeping one of the Air Force's most advanced fighter jets alive, and they all knew it. Riley's mind worked in overdrive. The jet's nose dipped slightly, the left stabilizer warning flaring again. Altitude was dropping faster than it should. The runway lay miles away, a thin strip of concrete and hope against the sprawling Florida landscape. Each adjustment had to be precise. One error could send them spinning into the ground. Her fingers moved almost automatically, guided by muscle memory and instinct honed over years of simulations. "Throttle, balance engines, compensate hydraulics," she whispered under her breath, speaking in the language of the jet itself. Falcon 1 responded, shuddering and groaning but remaining airborne. Slowly, painfully, the descent stabilized enough to give them a chance at a controlled approach. The instructor pilot let out a shaky breath. "I've flown hundreds of hours in this plane, never like this. You're insane and amazing." Riley didn't answer. There was no time for ego, no time for pride. She had to guide Falcon 1 through one of the most dangerous phases, descent toward the runway. She calculated the approach angle, factoring in wind, engine output, weight distribution, and the jet, unpredictable response. Her mind moved faster than any computer could, processing variables in real time. She initiated a shallow descent, micro-adjusting the ailerons, rudder, and stabilizers. Falcon 1 shuddered violently, warning alarms screaming in protest. Sweat ran down her face, blinding her temporarily. The instructor pilot glanced at her, awe and terror in his eyes. "I can't believe this. She's controlling it like a seasoned pilot." Riley ignored him. Every second mattered. The runway seemed impossibly small, a thin line against the chaos below. She had memorized every maneuver in simulations, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of gravity, failing systems, and faltering hydraulics all converging in a perfect storm of danger. She adjusted the throttles, feeling the engine strain and respond. Falcon 1 tilted, then leveled. Another shudder, another alarm, each one a reminder that failure was always just a fraction of a second away. Yet, against all odds, the jet remained in the sky. The ground radar lit up with frantic signals. "Falcon 1 stable, altitude dropping, runway alignment critical," shouted one technician. Every eye on the base was trained on the approaching miracle, watching as a teenage girl manipulated levers, toggled switches, and whispered calculations that seemed to defy reason. Riley focused on one critical aspect: alignment. The jet's trajectory had to match the runway's angle almost perfectly. A slight deviation would be catastrophic. She adjusted subtly, micro-correcting as she whispered to herself, "Steady, steady, steady." Smoke trailed from the engine vents. Alarms blared like sirens in a storm. Falcon 1 shuddered violently, but Riley's hands never wavered. She felt the jet's response as if it were an extension of her own body, every vibration a message she instinctively understood. Outside, the horizon stretched endlessly. The runway loomed closer. Ground crews held their breath, technicians shouted updates, and commanders exchanged stunned glances. Everyone knew that the impossible was happening. Falcon 1, under the hands of a 14-year-old girl, was holding together. Riley's heart pounded. She calculated fuel levels, engine output, and descent rate. The landing approach had to be precise, executed in a perfect sequence. One miscalculation and the jet would spin out of control. Her stomach churned with terror, but she forced herself to focus, blocking out fear entirely. Then came a sudden jolt, a warning light she had not anticipated. The left stabilizer had lost pressure entirely. Falcon 1 shuddered violently, dipping sharply toward the ground. Riley's stomach flipped. Time slowed. She had seconds to react. Her fingers flew across the controls, rerouting hydraulics to compensating surfaces, adjusting ailerons and rudder, modulating thrust with split-second timing. Falcon 1 responded fractionally. Slowly, agonizingly, the nose leveled. The jet trembled violently but stayed airborne. The instructor pilot's eyes widened. I don't believe it, she's actually keeping us alive," he whispered. His voice quivered with disbelief and awe. Riley's chest heaved with exertion. Sweat blurred her vision, but she forced herself to focus on the instruments, on the runway below, on every critical detail. She began adjusting descent angle and airspeed simultaneously, preparing for the approach that could make or break everything. Every adjustment had to be perfect. Falcon 1 had no room for error. Outside, the base was silent in anticipation. Every technician, pilot, and commander held their breath. They could see the jet's trajectory, every flicker of instability, every minute correction, and knew that the difference between disaster and survival rested in the hands of a girl they had barely believed could even comprehend the complexity of an F-22. Minutes felt like hours. Riley's mind raced, balancing physics, hydraulics, engine thrust, and aerodynamics in a way no adult pilot had ever done under such extreme conditions. She realized she was improvising in real time, blending memorized simulations with instant calculations born of intuition and instinct. Falcon 1's shudders became slightly less violent. Alarms began to flicker instead of scream. The runway grew larger, closer, a thin line of hope in the sprawling chaos. Riley's pulse hammered as she made the final adjustments to approach angle and descent rate. She whispered to herself, a mantra of precision and determination. Steady, controlled, keep it together. We can do this. The instructor pilot watched, jaw tight, eyes wide, hands hovering but not touching. I can't, she's actually doing this," he whispered. His awe was palpable, almost reverent. Riley's hands moved as if guided by instinct. The jet responded, stabilizing enough to attempt a controlled landing. But she knew the danger was far from over. Falcon 1 was still damaged, systems were failing, and the next moments would determine whether they survived or became another tragic headline. Suspenseful ending. The runway was in sight, but Falcon 1 was still faltering. Could a 14-year-old girl really execute a landing, or would the sky finally claim them both in the next heart-stopping second? The runway stretched beneath Falcon 1 like a fragile line of hope, barely visible through the haze of smoke, heat, and the adrenaline-fueled blur of the moment. Riley Carter's hands were clammy, knuckles white, her fingers moving over the controls with the precision of a seasoned pilot, yet her heart raced like a jackhammer in her chest. Every vibration, every shudder of the jet reverberated through her bones. Every alarm flashing in angry red felt like a ticking clock counting down the last seconds before disaster. The instructor pilot leaned forward, face pale and tight with tension. "We're coming in fast, Riley, just do what you did in the sky, don't overthink it." His voice quivered, a mix of terror, awe, and trust. Riley swallowed hard. There was no room for fear. Every ounce of her focus had to be on the jet, the instruments, and the fragile thread connecting them to survival. Falcon 1's nose dipped slightly, engines groaning, smoke curling faintly from the vents. One engine had begun to falter entirely, warning lights blinking furiously. Riley recalculated everything instantly: thrust adjustments, stabilizer compensation, descent angle, and runway alignment. Each micro-adjustment had to be perfect. One wrong move and they would not make it to the tarmac. Her pulse surged, but she forced herself to focus. She had memorized every emergency procedure, every landing sequence, but real life was unpredictable. Nothing could prepare her for the physical sensation of controlling a jet on the brink of failure. She whispered to herself, "Steady, steady, steady." The jet shuddered violently, dipping dangerously to the left. Riley's stomach lurched. She adjusted the ailerons, rerouted hydraulic pressure, and balanced engine thrust simultaneously. Falcon 1 responded, imperceptibly at first, then more steadily. The runway grew clearer in her viewfinder. She could see the ground crews frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief and fear. Every movement they made seemed to mirror her own tension. Outside, radar screens blazed with warnings, flashing red alerts about speed, descent rate, and hydraulic failure. Technicians shouted into radios, commands colliding in chaotic harmonies. Pilots in nearby jets watched silently, disbelief etched across their faces. They had never seen anything like this. A 14-year-old girl guiding one of the deadliest fighter jets in the world toward survival. Riley's hands flew over the controls, adjusting throttle, stabilizers, rudder, and ailerons in a perfect symphony of microcorrections. Falcon 1 shuddered violently with every adjustment, metal groaning under strain, yet it responded. Slowly, agonizingly, the descent began to smooth. The instructor pilot's voice broke the tense silence. "I've flown this jet for years. Never like this," he muttered. She's saving us." Riley didn't respond. Her focus was absolute. She could feel Falcon 1's responses beneath her fingertips, every vibration and shudder a language she instinctively understood. Every fraction of a second counted. The runway loomed closer, a thin strip of salvation amid chaos, yet still dauntingly far. She initiated the approach, carefully balancing descent rate with speed. Falcon 1 pitched violently, warning alarms screaming. Smoke curled from the failing engine, the smell of burning circuitry filling the cockpit. Riley's stomach lurched. She had seconds to correct the angle and speed, or the jet would spin out of control. Adjusting the throttles, she pushed Falcon 1 into a microcorrection, lowering the nose slightly, aligning with the runway, modulating engine power, stabilizing the descent. The jet trembled violently in protest, but responded. Gradually, imperceptibly, the descent smoothed enough to attempt a landing. The instructor pilot's eyes were wide with awe and fear. I can't believe it. She's actually bringing us down," he whispered. "Alive." Riley's mind raced through every emergency scenario she had memorized. She knew the margin for error was nearly non-existent. The jet had no room for mistakes. The hydraulics were failing. The left stabilizer had lost pressure entirely, and one engine was on the verge of complete failure. Yet, against all odds, Falcon 1 remained airborne, responding to the guidance of a girl who had never flown a jet in real life before this day. The runway stretched ever closer, lines of tarmac flashing past the windscreen, marking the edge of hope. Riley whispered instructions to herself, mantra-like, "Steady, precise, controlled. We can do this." The jet's shudders became slightly less violent, its screams of mechanical protest muted, almost responsive. A sudden jolt threw both Riley and the instructor pilot against their harnesses. Falcon 1's nose dipped dangerously and Riley's stomach lurched. She reacted instantly, hands flying across the controls, adjusting the stabilizers, modulating thrust, micro-correcting the approach. Slowly, agonizingly, the jet leveled again. Outside, ground crews held their breath. Radar screens flashed warning after warning, each one a heartbeat closer to catastrophe. Nearby pilots exchanged stunned glances, silently acknowledging the impossible. Falcon 1, damaged, unstable, teetering on the brink, was being guided towards survival by a 14-year-old girl. Riley felt sweat streaming down her face, her muscles trembling from the effort, yet she ignored it. She had to focus. Every adjustment, every calculation had to be perfect. She lowered the nose slightly, throttled the engines just enough to maintain stability, and prepared for the final moments of the approach. Almost there, she whispered. The jet responded, shuddering but steady. The runway stretched closer, and she could feel Falcon 1 aligning perfectly with it, micro-adjusting with each second. The instructor pilot's voice cracked. She's actually doing it. She's bringing it down safely. Riley's pulse thundered as she pushed the final adjustments. Falcon 1 groaned under stress, shuddering violently as it touched the tarmac. Tires screamed, sparks flew from the friction, smoke puffed into the air. The jet skidded slightly but did not flip, did not explode. Slowly, agonizingly, it came to a complete stop. The cockpit fell silent, save for the hiss of cooling systems and the faint crackle of instruments. Riley slumped back, trembling, sweat streaming down her face, tears of relief burning her eyes. The instructor pilot exhaled shakily, gripping her shoulder. You just saved us," he whispered. Outside, the base erupted into chaos. Shouts, applause, and astonished murmurs echoed across the tarmac. Ground crews rushed to Falcon 1, checking for damage, ensuring safety, while radar operators and commanders exchanged stunned glances. They had witnessed a miracle. Falcon 1 was alive, and so was Riley Carter. But even in the triumph, a gnawing realization hit her. The world had just seen what she had done, and the consequences were only beginning. How would the Air Force respond? Could a 14-year-old girl truly be trusted with this knowledge, this skill? And would the public ever believe what had just happened? Suspenseful ending. Falcon 1 had landed, but Riley's life was about to change forever. And the Air Force, the nation, and the world were about to discover that a kid had just done the impossible. Riley Carter finally unclipped herself from the cockpit harness, muscles trembling, sweat soaking her flight suit. Falcon 1 stood silent on the tarmac, the roar of engines fading into the aftermath of chaos. Around her, ground crews and Air Force personnel swarmed the jet, checking instruments, stabilizers, and engines, their faces a mixture of awe, disbelief, and disbelief-stricken respect. Every pair of eyes seemed to be searching for the pilot, expecting a seasoned Air Force ace. But they weren't prepared for what they saw. A 14-year-old girl, small, wide-eyed, shaking with exhaustion. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Shaw stepped beside her, voice tight with emotion. You did it," he said, almost in disbelief. "I've flown Falcon 1 for years. I've trained with the best. No one should have been able to do what you just did." He paused, shaking his head. "But you did. You actually did it." Riley forced a tired smile, brushing a lock of sweat-soaked hair from her forehead. I just knew what needed to happen," she said softly, almost to herself. "I remembered from simulations, from studying every manual." The commotion around her intensified. Officers and engineers surrounded the jet, shouting to each other, pointing at consoles and checking diagnostics. They couldn't believe it. Falcon 1 had sustained heavy stress, critical engine warnings, and hydraulic failures, but the aircraft was intact. And the pilot, somehow, a teenager, had saved it. Shaw lowered his voice. "We need to get you inside. You need a medical check, and we need to figure out how the hell you did this without dying." As Riley followed him toward the base hangar, whispers spread like wildfire across the tarmac. Technicians exchanged incredulous glances. Radar operators tapped their screens, confirming the impossible. Nearby pilots murmured to each other. "Did you see her hands?" one said. "She was controlling Falcon 1 like she was born in the cockpit." Inside the hangar, Riley was immediately ushered to a medical team. Her vitals were checked, her sweat-drenched uniform replaced, and a blanket draped over her shoulders. She shivered, not from cold but from adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. The instructor pilot, pale and wide-eyed, sat beside her. You're incredible," he said quietly, voice trembling. "I've never seen anyone do what you just did. Not in a simulation, not in training, no one. You literally saved Falcon 1 and me." Riley shook her head, voice barely audible. I knew what to do." She glanced down at her hands, the same hands that had stabilized the most advanced fighter jet in the Air Force. "I've studied, I've practiced, it just worked." Shaw entered the hangar, his expression a mixture of shock, respect, and concern. "Riley," he said firmly, "you need to understand what you just did. The entire Air Force and soon the nation will know about this. People will want answers. They'll want to know how a kid did what even the most experienced pilots couldn't. Are you ready for that?" Riley's stomach tightened. She hadn't thought beyond surviving the jet's descent. I don't know," she whispered. Fear and pride mingled in her chest. "I just wanted to save it, to save him, to save Falcon 1. Shaw nodded slowly. "And you did. But the world, it's going to want to understand you, your knowledge, your skill. They'll want to know how this happened, and they may not believe it at first. But believe me, Riley, you just shocked the entire Air Force. They've never seen anything like this." Outside, the media had already begun to arrive. Reports of the near catastrophe and the miraculous landing had spread through unofficial channels. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and the base went into a controlled frenzy of protocol, interviews, and damage assessments. Riley was led to a private area, shielded from the chaos. Even there, whispers and awed murmurs filled the air. One of the senior engineers, a veteran who had worked on Falcon 1 for over a decade, approached her. "Kid," he said softly, voice tinged with disbelief, "I've spent years building, testing, and maintaining this jet. I've flown simulations, trained pilots, and I've never seen anyone handle it like that. Not a single person. And now you did it." Riley's voice shook. I just remembered what I learned. I followed the sequence, used what I knew, it just worked." The engineer knelt slightly, meeting her gaze. "Kid, you just did something no adult, no Air Force pilot could do. You're a genius, and more importantly, you're incredibly brave. That was pure instinct, skill, and courage." Meanwhile, Shaw received a direct call from the Pentagon. Within minutes, the situation escalated to the highest levels of the Air Force. The F-22 Raptor program commanders were on high alert, demanding a full debrief. Riley, the girl who had just stabilized and landed the most advanced fighter jet in the world, was now at the center of a storm she had never imagined. An Air Force general entered the hangar, his expression unreadable. "Riley Carter," he said, voice firm but curious. "We've reviewed the telemetry, the radar logs, and the cockpit recordings. Every single parameter indicates that Falcon 1 stabilization was handled perfectly. By a kid." He paused, eyes narrowing. "You're 14, and yet you controlled systems that are classified at the highest level. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've just done?" Riley nodded faintly, shivering from adrenaline and the weight of the situation. I didn't think about the magnitude. I just had to do it." The general sighed, a mixture of awe and concern in his expression. "You didn't just save the jet, you saved the Air Force thousands of dollars in potential loss, not to mention the lives on the ground that could have been affected if it had crashed. Your actions defy logic, defy probability, and frankly, they're unprecedented." Riley looked down, overwhelmed by the praise and attention. "I just knew what to do," she whispered again. "I've studied, I've practiced, and it just happened." Shaw stepped forward, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Riley, you've done something no one thought possible, and now the world is going to find out. This isn't just about Falcon 1. They're going to want to know how a kid, yes, a kid, could control the most advanced fighter jet in the Air Force under catastrophic failure and survive. They'll want answers." Riley's eyes widened. She hadn't considered the public, the press, the government. She had only focused on the jet, the flight, and the immediate danger. Now, reality hit. She was no longer just a kid who loved planes. She was someone who had changed the course of an Air Force operation, someone whose actions would be remembered forever. And yet there was another layer, a deeper truth she hadn't shared. She had not just relied on her studies and simulations. Something inside her, a natural understanding, an instinctual connection to flight, had guided her hands, guiding Falcon 1 as if she had been born to fly. That secret, even she didn't fully understand yet. Suspenseful ending. The world now knew she existed, but what they didn't know, and what Riley herself was only beginning to realize, was that her gift, her instinct, and her connection to flight were far greater than anyone could imagine. And the Air Force, the nation, and the world were about to discover it, in ways none of them could foresee. The hangar fell silent except for the soft hiss of cooling systems and the occasional murmur of stunned engineers. Riley Carter sat on a crate, her flight suit damp with sweat, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline drained. Outside, Falcon 1 rested like a wounded giant, its engines silent but intact, the metal scarred from stress but unbroken. Around her, the Air Force brass, engineers, and media personnel buzzed with a mixture of disbelief, awe, and curiosity. Lieutenant Commander Shaw stood beside her, his expression a blend of pride and disbelief. "You did something no one thought possible," he said quietly. "You saved Falcon 1, you saved the flight, and honestly, you've shocked the entire Air Force." Riley looked down, unable to process the enormity of what had just happened. Her stomach churned not with fear, but with the realization that the world had just witnessed a 14-year-old girl accomplish what seasoned pilots couldn't. She had stabilized the most advanced fighter jet on the planet mid-flight, fought failing hydraulics, a sputtering engine, and a descent that could have killed them all, and she had landed it. General Thomas, a high-ranking Air Force officer, stepped forward. His face was stern, but his eyes betrayed awe. "Riley Carter," he said, voice calm but firm, "you've demonstrated a level of skill, courage, and instinct that defies logic. Falcon 1 is alive because of you. Lives were spared because of you. The Air Force owes you more than words can express." Riley swallowed, trying to focus. I just did what I had to do," she whispered. "I remembered what I studied, the simulations, and I tried to stay calm." Thomas nodded slowly. "Calm? That was nothing short of miraculous. You didn't just stay calm, you commanded a machine designed to kill, a weapon of war, and you saved it, and us, all of us." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You're not just a pilot, Riley, you're a prodigy." Engineers crowded around, pointing at the cockpit, running diagnostics and confirming the data. Every reading corroborated what everyone had already seen. Falcon 1 had been stabilized, controlled, and landed flawlessly. And the one who had done it, a 14-year-old girl who had never flown a jet in real combat. Shaw leaned closer to Riley, lowering his voice. "Do you understand what you've done? The entire Air Force is going to want to debrief you. Congress will want to hear your story. This will be on the news. People will call it impossible, unbelievable, miraculous." Riley shook her head. I just did what I had to do." Her voice quivered with exhaustion and awe. "I didn't think about any of that." But the Air Force had already begun mobilizing. Within minutes, Falcon 1's telemetry and flight recordings were being uploaded, analyzed, and confirmed by senior engineers. Every control input Riley had made, every microadjustment was logged, proving the impossible. A child had piloted and saved the most advanced fighter jet in existence under catastrophic failure conditions. Word spread faster than anyone anticipated. Within hours, Riley became the focus of military attention, media speculation, and national curiosity. Interviews were requested, commendations drafted, and the story of Falcon 1 and the girl who had defied death began to circulate across social media and news networks. Shaw escorted Riley to a private briefing room. "You have to understand," he said, voice low, "what you did, it changes everything. You've proven that skill, instinct, and courage aren't defined by age. You've rewritten what's possible, but there are questions you need to answer. How did you know what to do? How did you execute every maneuver so precisely?" Riley hesitated. Part of her wanted to explain the hours of study, the simulations, the obsessive obsession with aircraft schematics. But there was another truth, one she hadn't fully understood herself yet. An instinctual connection to flight, a natural understanding of the aircraft's rhythm, its responses, and its needs. I think I just knew," she said softly. "I've studied a lot, practiced simulations, but it felt like I could feel the jet, like it was telling me what it needed." Shaw raised his eyebrows, skeptical but intrigued. "You're telling me you felt the jet? You responded instinctively?" Riley nodded. I don't know how else to explain it. I've never felt anything like it before, but it worked. The general re-entered the room, a file in hand. Riley, he said, voice firm but respectful, you've just changed the way we view training, instinct, and human capability. The Air Force will honor you, and there will be recognition, medals, and more importantly, studies into how you achieved this. Falcon 1 survived because of you. The nation owes you gratitude beyond words. Riley's stomach tightened. Recognition had never been her goal. She hadn't done this for fame, for awards, or for attention. She had done it because it was the right thing to do, because a life and a jet were at stake. Yet now she realized the world would never forget her. Outside the briefing room, the media frenzy had begun. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered and speculated, and the story of Falcon 1 and the young girl who had piloted it to safety spread across the nation like wildfire. Social media exploded with hashtags: Falcon 1 hero, girl pilot, miracle landing. Riley's life, once quiet and ordinary, was now thrust into the national spotlight. Back in the hangar, Shaw looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. You saved a plane, a pilot, and maybe even a part of the Air Force's reputation today, he said. But now, the world wants to know you. Are you ready for that? Riley paused, taking a deep breath. I guess I'll have to be. She glanced at Falcon 1, the plane she had fought to save, the plane that had tested every limit of her skill, courage, and instinct. But I hope people remember that it wasn't just me. It was the jet, too. We did it together. The general nodded solemnly. You're right, but history will remember you, and the Air Force will never be the same. For the first time, Riley allowed herself to relax. She had survived the impossible. She had defied odds, skillfully piloted a deadly fighter jet under catastrophic failure, and landed it against all expectations. The nation, the Air Force, and the world would soon learn her story, and they would be in awe. But deep inside, Riley felt the quiet pull of destiny. Falcon 1 had been saved, but she had discovered something far greater: a gift, a connection, and a courage that could change the course of lives, and perhaps even history. As the hangar erupted into controlled chaos, Riley Carter looked at Falcon 1 one last time. She knew this was only the beginning. The world had witnessed the impossible, and the girl who had done it was only getting started. Final suspenseful ending. Riley's life had changed forever. The nation now knew her name, but even she had yet to understand the full extent of her abilities. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge the limits of courage, skill, and human potential.